the means of uniting them. Written and read by P.O. Dixon. Chapter 1. Derbyshire, England, September 1812. Elizabeth, my dear, I could not help but overhear you questioning the chambermaid about Mr. Darcy's presence in this part of the country. Are you really so opposed to touring his home? Are you afraid you might encounter him? Asked Mrs. Madeline Gardiner, her expression puzzled. A lady of sense and education, whose elegance belied her station in life. She sat in the chair opposite her niece. I know there was a time when you thought rather poorly of him, but I was given to believe your opinion of the gentleman had suffered a material change after your having spent time in company with him while the two of you were in Kent at Easter. One of 5 unmarried daughters, whose mother made it the business of her life to marry each of them off to whoever would take them. Miss Elizabeth Bennet measured her response to her dearest aunt carefully before speaking. She had concealed so much of what had actually transpired between Mr. Darcy and herself from her family, her friends, everyone really, apart from her dearest sister, Jane. Specifically, that the gentleman had offered his hand in marriage. Her trip to Derbyshire with her uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, had allowed her to escape her matchmaking mamma's machinations, but it was not without its risks. Elizabeth softly exhaled. It is true, my opinion of Mr. Darcy has improved considerably over the course of our acquaintance, but that does not give me license to visit his home with impunity. Were Mr. Darcy to discover me roaming about his estate, I fear he might think I am impertinent, or worse, throwing myself in his path. The older woman shrugged. These great men have always made their homes available for public tours. Why should you not avail yourself of the same liberties as anyone else? Oh, aunt, I fear my reasons are very sound, and if you really knew the nature of my acquaintance with Mr. Darcy, you would think so too. What is there to know other than he wounded your vanity when you first met, and it was many months before he was able to overcome your ill opinion as a result? Do you harbor some lingering resentment over what you perceive as his ill treatment of Mr. Wickham? Or perhaps what you believe is his part in separating Jane and Mr. Bingley? Perhaps you believe he is too proud. Yes, Elizabeth cried with energy. Quickly rethinking her stance, she said, what I mean to say is no. Indeed, no. I do not know. Again, carefully measuring her words, Elizabeth continued, I harbor no such resentment of Mr. Darcy for either of those reasons you cited. As I told you, Mr. Wickham's character is not at all as he would have any of us believe. While in Kent, Elizabeth had learned that Mr. Wickham, a man whom she had once held in the highest esteem upon making his acquaintance, was not only a scoundrel, he was an accomplished liar, especially in matters concerning Mr. Darcy. Then, what am I not understanding? Dearest aunt, I have been harboring a great secret since my return from Kent, one I have shared but with one other person, my dearest Jane. I fear nothing short of a complete disclosure will help you comprehend the nature of my despair. But first, I must have your promise that you will tell no one. Of course I shall keep your secret, my dear. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Mr. Darcy offered his hand to me. He professed his love for me most ardently when the two of us were in Kent. Oddly enough, her declaration was like a breath of fresh air. She had shared her secret with someone other than her sister Jane, and to her favorite aunt no less, whose good opinion Elizabeth relied upon. Her surprise in hearing this evident, Mrs. Gardiner said, I know you too well to suspect you are secretly engaged, and thus I must beg you to disclose the reason you refused such a man. Elizabeth hesitated, but only for a moment, attempting to collect herself. It is a rather long, sordid affair, to be sure, but suffice it to say that Mr. Darcy could not have proposed to me at a worse time. Neither did he do so in a manner which might possibly recommend his suit. Indeed, the gentleman had confessed to loving Elizabeth against his will, against his reason, and even against his character. She told her aunt as much. Having rejected 2 marriage proposals in the span of 5 to 6 months, Elizabeth was not sure her aunt would understand why she would refuse a man of Mr. Darcy's consequence. It was Mrs. Gardiner, after all, who had cautioned Elizabeth to be reasonable as regarded her esteem for Mr. Wickham, and quite explicitly advised her against falling in love with such a man, whose circumstances in life would do nobody, not even himself, much good. Mr. Darcy, on the other hand, was 10 times Wickham's consequence. Even her best friend, the former Miss Charlotte Lucas, who later went on to marry a decent, albeit ridiculous man, had told Elizabeth thus. Mrs. Gardiner had advised Elizabeth of just how such a disadvantageous alliance would affect her father, her mother, and her sisters. Surely she would think her niece was not as clever as everyone liked to believe, were Elizabeth not to understand the advantages for everyone if she became Mrs. Elizabeth Darcy, the mistress of Pemberley. At length Elizabeth said, "I know I have your promise not to confide my secret to anyone. I must also beg you not to judge me too severely. I do not know how I would endure were I to lose your esteem. I should hope that I have never judged you, my dear. I confess I am wont to share my opinion when I believe it is warranted, to alter a particular path you might be tempted to choose for yourself. But I should like to think I never judged you." Another burden was thus lifted from Elizabeth's shoulders, even though she could not say she did not sometimes second-guess herself. Mr. Darcy's letter explaining his motives in separating her sister and Mr. Bingley, as well as his exposing George Wickham, and possibly subjecting his own sister to censure, had made a lasting impression on Elizabeth. After Elizabeth and her aunt had exhausted the topic of Mr. Darcy's failed proposal, and Elizabeth had confessed all that she could without risking the demise of any esteem her aunt might hold for Mr. Darcy, the older woman threw a furtive glance outside a nearby window. "It looks like there may be rain today. Perhaps Mr. Gardiner and I are the ones who ought to forego the tour of Pemberley. We might easily send you to Pemberley alone, on horseback no less, and of course you might be forced to spend the night. You might be compelled to remain there until Mr. Darcy's eventual return, at which point he'll confess his undying love for you, and the two of you shall live at Pemberley as man and wife for the remainder of your days." Elizabeth laughed at this side of her aunt. Now who was the one entertaining silly conjectures and playing matchmaker? "Oh, do let us go to Pemberley," Mrs. Gardiner cried. "I dare say it would probably do you a great deal of good to see the place at least once, as I recall having spent a good part of my life in that part of the country. It is by far the most spectacular estate you have yet to behold. I fear if you leave this part of the country without visiting Pemberley, especially out of misguided fear, you might never forgive yourself. The chambermaid has assured you Mr. Darcy will not be there, and we have no reason to doubt her. And besides, what if she were mistaken? What is the worst thing that could happen? That Mr. Darcy might behave the scorned man and refuse to acknowledge your presence? If such is the true nature of his character, then you will at least have the satisfaction of knowing that you did the right thing in refusing his hand, forever eliminating any lingering doubts you may be harboring." Elizabeth half smiled at this picture of a possible encounter with the gentleman. He had been rather abrupt in taking his leave after handing her the letter in the grove. She, as much as anyone knew, aloofness, haughtiness, and thinly veiled disdain were not beyond him. She would not be surprised if such a characterization did not aptly describe him. Indeed, what is the worst thing that can happen? Chapter 2. Having absent-mindedly allowed her aunt and uncle to outpace her while they toured the beautiful grounds of Pemberley, Elizabeth could not help but marvel at all the loveliness before her. From the moment her party entered Pemberley Woods, all that she had beheld was magnificent. The landscape's splendor was hardly anything at all compared to Pemberley Manor itself, and Elizabeth could not help but think that of all the splendor that surrounded her, she might have been mistress. The somewhat improved opinion she had of Mr. Darcy as a consequence of reading his letter in Kent, and thus having garnered a better understanding of his character, was further bolstered by the strong commendation of the housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds. Words to the effect of his being the best landlord, the best master, and the best brother that ever lived. Elizabeth had been compelled to acknowledge her acquaintance with the gentleman upon admiring his likeness in the art gallery, which proved rather fortunate when the housekeeper apologized for his not being in residence. "My master is due to arrive at Pemberley tomorrow with a large party," the older woman said. Mrs. Reynolds' words were a balm to Elizabeth's spirits, for upon hearing them, and thus receiving much-needed confirmation of the testimony from the servant at the end, she released a deep sigh of relief. She finally felt free to enjoy her tour, and even suffered a sense of awe that the master of such a grand estate had confessed to loving her most ardently not too long ago. I must not dwell on any of that now, for despite Mr. Darcy's explanation for his part in separating Jane and Mr. Bingley, and despite his account of what really unfolded between him and Mr. Wickham, I would be entirely remiss to turn a deaf ear on his criticisms of my family, even though nearly every word he said was accurate, she reminded herself. I am sure he would be compelled to change his opinion were he to meet Uncle and Aunt Gardiner. I wager he would regard them as fashionable people of sense and education. He is, after all, quite fond of the Bingleys, who, save their large fortune, have no higher claim to status and privilege than my London relations. Such weighty thoughts as these were having the opposite effect on Elizabeth than what she would have liked. Despite the occasional tinge of regret that threatened to dampen her lively spirits, on the whole, she really had no cause to repine, and never more so than that moment when she was surrounded by such wonderment. She walked on, pausing here and there along the way in admiration, when she came to a fork in the path and realized she had no idea which one her relations had chosen. No stranger to losing herself while on one of her solitary rambles, Elizabeth chose the path on her right, the one that followed a smaller stream. With luck, this path shall lead me directly to my uncle and aunt, and if not, I shall simply retrace my steps and continue directly to the manor house. A quarter hour later, Elizabeth did just that. Her pace varied as she returned, ambling slowly at times, taking in for the last time some of the most memorable parts of her solitary ramble. Pemberley's unadorned natural beauty presented a striking contrast to the well-mannered lanes of Rosings Park. Indeed, she much preferred the former. Thoughts of Rosings Park set her busy mind to the many times when she had accidentally met Mr. Darcy on one of its paths, and how he always seemed to be waiting for her. Had I realized Mr. Darcy likely fancied himself courting me, would my response to his proposal have been different? Elizabeth asked herself. Her mind wandering down the path of what might have been, she nearly gasped aloud when the object of her musings appeared within 20 yards ahead of her. Too close to pretend she did not see him, she silently debated how she ought to act. Do I turn and walk away? Do I run away? Do I stand here and wait for him to approach me? Do I walk right up to him? The first was certainly not an option. Neither was the second. I am Elizabeth Bennet. My courage always rises at such times as this. Nor shall I simply stand here looking stupid. I know what I must do. Moments later, she and Mr. Darcy stood face to face. He does not appear to be disturbed by my presence. In truth, his expression is entirely unreadable. Elizabeth curtsied just as he bowed. Determined to speak first, she said, Mr. Darcy, Miss Bennet. Of course he would address her formally given the circumstances. However, a part of her wished he had chosen a more informal appellation, Miss Elizabeth. Even when she was absolutely certain that she did not like him, she was not immune to the pleasing manner in which he spoke her given name. Sir, you must know I would never willingly have come and intruded upon your home in such a manner as this had I known you were in residence. Trust me, I took painstaking measures to assure you would be away. His expression evidently pained Mr. Darcy said, I wish you would not say that. He sucked in his breath. What I meant to say is that, upon having read my letter, I had hoped your opinion of me would have improved enough to allow the two of us to be civil. I would like to think that leading up to my proposal, the two of us were cordial toward each other. Hesitating a moment, he said, You did read my letter, did you not? Elizabeth nodded. Yes, I dare say I have committed your letter to heart. How can you ever forgive me for my incivility as a consequence of my former good opinion of... She paused, as though embarrassed to confess to being so foolish, so naive. "Of Mr. Wickham," Elizabeth uttered. "Surely there exists the need for forgiveness on your part as well. I should not have spoken of your loved ones as I did. In retrospect, you would not be the woman that I... Sensing the disturbance in her companion's mind, Elizabeth interrupted. "I am perfectly willing to start anew if you are, Mr. Darcy. Indeed, seeing as I have effectively thrown myself in your path, my extending an olive branch only seems fitting." Seemingly pleased by this playful gesture, Mr. Darcy smiled. How Elizabeth wished he had smiled more during the earliest days of their acquaintance. Surely a man with such a brilliant smile as his is a man with a good heart. "Are you staying in Lambton?" Mr. Darcy asked. Again she nodded. "With my aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, from town. I imagine you were accompanied by your uncle and aunt on your tour of Pemberley. Shall we go in search of them?" "I should be very honored to make their acquaintance." Elizabeth did not know whether to be astonished or pleased by this stroke of civility, one for which she was wholly unprepared. "Surely Mr. Darcy knows that my relations live in Cheapside, near my uncle's warehouses." She thought to remind him of that particular fact, but sensing the impertinence inherent in such a retort, she resisted. "I must confess to being inadvertently separated from them while touring your lovely grounds. I suppose if I headed back to the manor house, I would find them waiting for me." "Capital," Mr. Darcy said. "I would very much enjoy the chance to share a light repast with you all. That is, supposing your party is in no rush to return to Lambton." Feeling greater ease with each passing moment, Elizabeth said, "I dare not speak for any other plans my relations may have for this afternoon, but I cannot imagine they would want to miss the chance to enjoy more of your warm hospitality. Pemberley is everything Miss Bingley said it would be." She wanted to say more, to question his being away as much as he was. But Mrs. Reynolds' earlier words when speaking with her uncle on the possibility of his being at Pemberley more often were he to marry echoed in her mind. "Yes, sir," the housekeeper had affirmed, "but I do not know when that will be. I do not know who is good enough for him." Now in possession of a more thorough understanding of the master of Pemberley, Elizabeth could not help but ask herself a similar question. Who can deserve him? Part of her screamed, that woman could very well have been herself. Another part whispered, mutually extended olive branches aside, "This man is lost to me forever." Chapter 3. As a consequence of Elizabeth's harsh rejection of his marriage proposal, Darcy had promised himself that he would be a better man than the one who had stood before her some months ago, with every expectation of a favorable reply. Blind and self-importance best described his character at the time. Blind to the very real fact that Elizabeth did not care for him, and self-importance to the extent of presuming she possibly could. And those are the words of a gentleman. How Elizabeth's assertion had struck him to his very core. For if he were not the consummate gentleman, then what was he? Darcy was not immune to the irony that had Elizabeth accepted him as he presented himself to her that evening at the parsonage, she might very well have done so, not because she suffered the same ardent love for him as he did for her, but rather because it was the most prudent thing to do for a young woman, any young woman, regardless of her station in life. He had allowed his own wealth and station in life to cause him to think meanly of those whom he considered beneath him in consequence, and his behavior toward Elizabeth and her family had found him wanting. Meeting Elizabeth at Pemberley, of all places on earth, had not been something he had expected, but it was precisely what he needed. Surely our meeting for the first time since I gave her the letter in the plantation at Rosings is not merely a coincidence. Surely it is more than a lucky chance. I have to believe her being here is meant to be. Darcy gave a sidelong glance to his walking companion, Miss Elizabeth Bennet. He recalled their having walked along beside each other so many times before about the lanes at Rosings Park, and how he had blissfully misunderstood what was happening between the two of them, assuming a degree of familiarity with her that was wholly unwarranted. I pray I am not setting myself up for further disappointment, for I am as much in love with her as ever before. and I will do everything in my power to show her that I am worthy of a second chance, starting with her relations. Darcy and Elizabeth were likely just as surprised as the Gardiners when their paths crossed near the pond. How disappointing for the former. For as much as he wished to meet Elizabeth's London relations, he longed for more time alone with her. Elizabeth could barely suppress her enthusiasm in approaching the elegant couple, giving Darcy to know that they were very important to her, and she was exceedingly proud of them. Darcy could only hope that one day in the very near future, he would be fond of them as well. When the introductions were made, Elizabeth could not help but be pleased by the readiness with which Mr. Darcy fell into conversation with her aunt and uncle. What a triumph! How consoling that Mr. Darcy should know she had relations for whom there was no need to blush. Elizabeth listened most attentively to all that passed between her relations and Mr. Darcy, and she gloried in every expression and every sentence of her uncle, which marked his intelligence, his taste, or his good manners. When it was time for the visitors to take their leave, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth trailed slowly behind the Gardiners on the way to the awaiting carriage. "May I join you in Lambton tomorrow, Miss Elizabeth?" he asked. His addressing her by a Christian name was such a welcome reprieve to the decorum he had exercised earlier. The past couple hours spent in Mr. Darcy's company along with her relations had established a sense of intimacy with the gentleman, the degree to which had never existed in Kent, when she had spent copious amounts of time in his company. There they were, the two of them standing next to each other, and he was expressing an interest in calling on her. How odd that he had offered his hand in marriage to her, and never once had those particular words crossed his lips. "May I call on you?" Could this really be the start he had requested, was the first question Elizabeth asked herself. Against her own will, her mind leaped from a renewed friendship to courtship to marriage, all within the blink of an eye. Reason just as quickly prevailed over such a fanciful notion, which was fortunate indeed, for having spent time with him, the steadily increasing favorable opinion she suffered could only improve. But she was not so certain that the reasons for her initial refusal had dissipated entirely. True, the complete discrediting of all of Wickham's false accusations against Mr. Darcy had removed a significant impediment. His exemplary manner of behavior when meeting and subsequently conversing with her relations had also helped. But there was still the matter of his separation of his friend, Mr. Bingley, from her dearest sister, Jane. His explanation, though very sound in hindsight, was rather insufficient in quelling her own pain as a consequence of Jane's continuing heartbreak. "There is very soon to be an addition to my country party, who will claim an acquaintance with you, and will surely wish to renew said acquaintance as soon as can be." "Oh?" Elizabeth asked, finding her voice even as she realized she still had not accepted his request to call on her in Lambton. "Indeed, it is Charles Bingley. He and his family are expected to arrive very soon." "All his family?" Elizabeth questioned, unable to hide her dismay. Mr. Darcy nodded. "Also, my sister Georgiana shall be arriving shortly, and I would very much like to introduce the two of you. I shall have both of them accompany me, that is, assuming you consent to my earlier request to call on you." Elizabeth said, "Oh, yes, yes, indeed. I should very much like to see Mr. Bingley after all these months, and I will be delighted to meet your sister as well." "Excellent," said Mr. Darcy, smiling. Once again, his smile nearly took Elizabeth's breath away. Once again, she wondered at never having realized what a handsome man Mr. Darcy was. By now, it was time to say goodbye, and Mr. Darcy took Elizabeth by her hand and assisted her into the carriage. And although this was not the first time their hands had met, it was undoubtedly the first time such a powerful vision of excitement raced through her body. That the gentleman held on to her hand a second or two longer than was necessary did not go unnoticed by Elizabeth. Neither had his intimate gesture gone unnoticed by her dearest aunt, by the knowing look the older woman bestowed, a look Elizabeth pretended not to see. Chapter 4. "I wager you are quite pleased in having overcome your reservations and visited Pemberley," "My dearest niece," said Mrs. Gardiner, when she could, later that evening after supper at the inn. "I confess I do not regret my decision, but Aunt Gardiner, things could have unfolded most unpleasantly were it not for—" Here Elizabeth did not know quite what to say. How much was it safe to reveal to her aunt without fully revealing the small piece of her that clung to the impossible hope that she might indeed see Mr. Darcy again, that they might reconcile the differences between them, that perhaps there might be more? "If not for what, Lizzie?" Elizabeth shrugged. "I suppose if not for Mr. Darcy himself," she replied. "He might just as easily have thrown rocks at me and chased me away from his home with a stick, after the manner of our last meeting," Elizabeth said, her voice conveying a hint of playfulness she did not truly feel deep down inside. "Oh, Lizzie, how have you enjoyed making light of something so serious as meeting a gentleman who might very well have been your betrothed, perhaps even your husband by now, had a confluence of circumstances not conspired against you?" "A confluence of events seems quite an understatement. After seeing Pemberley for myself this afternoon, I assure you nothing would have persuaded me to behave as I did in Kent. Did you not see the size of the place, the beauty, the splendor? I dare say I would have married my cousin Mr. Collins had he been the master of an estate 1/10 Pemberley's grandeur." Again Elizabeth spoke in jest. "No, I shall not allow you to distract me with such silly conjectures. Be serious. You are a fine studier of people. Pray, do you believe there is a chance Mr. Darcy might renew his proposal?" "Dear aunt, I must beg to differ with you, for were I as astute a studier of people's character as I long professed to being, then surely I would have realized that Mr. Darcy had fancied himself in love with me, so much so that he offered his hand to me in marriage." "I have not known you to doubt yourself like this before." "I am afraid it took Mr. Darcy's proposal and the events that happened as a consequence of my refusal to teach me that I never really knew myself at all. How despicable her behavior had been toward Mr. Darcy! How humiliating! In courting prepossession and ignorance where her good opinion of Mr. Wickham was concerned, Elizabeth had totally misunderstood Mr. Darcy. You are very severe on yourself, and thus I will try not to do the same. However, I cannot let this conversation end without questioning something you just said." "Oh," Elizabeth cried. Mrs. Gardiner nodded. "You said Mr. Darcy fancied himself in love with you. Surely you do not mean to suggest that the gentleman was merely infatuated, that he does not know his own mind? The gentleman I had the honor of meeting and spending time with this afternoon strikes me as anything but a man of a capricious nature. He presents himself as a very serious man, perhaps a tad too serious. I dare say he wants nothing but a bit of liveliness in his life, and no doubt he knows it too, which is the reason he fell in love with you, I believe, and which is why he offered his hand to you." Elizabeth did not wish to expose herself to false hope, but her aunt's words were too persuasive for her to dismiss them out of hand. "Even if what you are positing is true, even if I wanted to believe that everything you are saying is true, what would it matter? Surely a gentleman like Mr. Darcy would never propose to a woman who has rejected him once before. Who is to say how a man who was persuaded he had met the woman with whom he wished to spend his life might react given the right circumstances? As for myself, I should like very much to find out. But here's the material point, my dear Lizzie. Do you?" That night, as Elizabeth lay awake in bed, waiting for quiet slumber to carry her off to places she could scarcely imagine, a persistent thought occupied her mind. "Oh, why did I allow myself to be so easily persuaded to tour Pemberley, when I might well have complained of a headache?" Of course, she had used such an excuse before, in an attempt to elude Mr. Darcy. That was just after his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, had informed her, however unintentionally, of Mr. Darcy's role in separating Jane from her lover, Mr. Bingley. Elizabeth had been no more successful in evading Mr. Darcy then as she had been that day. In defense of the chambermaid, who had mistakenly said that Mr. Darcy was away from Derbyshire, even the gentleman's own housekeeper had no awareness of his return ahead of the rest of his party. Seeing Mr. Darcy conversing with her relations with the ease of long-time acquaintances, even after she had expressly told him they were her aunt and uncle from Cheapside, caused the flicker of hope she had tried to suppress upon seeing Pemberley to ignite into a full-blown flame. A part of her wanted to laugh out loud at this new awareness, the same part that silently argued, "I shall wait until I see Mr. Darcy again tomorrow, and then I shall know how to feel." Meanwhile, 5 miles away, Darcy was nestled in his great, big, comfortable bed for the first time in months. Having finally found the woman with whom he wished to spend the rest of his life, he had thought surely that he would never again occupy that bed alone. Yet there he was, his thoughts of the bewitching Miss Elizabeth Bennet, his sole companion. I wonder if Miss Elizabeth is fast asleep, or perchance she is thinking of me. I dare say the manner of our parting was a cause for hope, especially when she turned and looked back at me as her carriage drove away. I pray she is just as eager to see me tomorrow as I am to see her. Darcy smoothed his hand over the empty side of his bed, wishing with all his heart that Elizabeth was there, not 5 miles away at Lambton. What will it take to make Miss Elizabeth mine? My woman, my wife, my lover. With such thoughts as these, at length he drifted off to sleep, the happiest place in the world for him ever since first laying eyes on Elizabeth. For in his dreams, Elizabeth was already his. He knew every inch of her body, her light and pleasing figure, her sensuous curves, the soft touch of her hands exploring his body as he explored hers. He loved the taste of her, the nape of her neck, the swell of her bosom. Indeed, in Darcy's dreams, Elizabeth was his in every way, night after night until morning came. Awakening with that very thought in mind, Darcy breathed a heavy sigh. Pray my dreams will soon come true. Chapter 5. Having had the advantage of espying Miss Georgiana Darcy descend the Darcy carriage with the aid of her older brother, Elizabeth was quite prepared for the formidable introduction when Mr. Darcy presented his sister to the Gardiners and herself. Elizabeth marveled at the irony. When she was under the spell of George Wickham's charms, she had been entirely persuaded that Miss Georgiana Darcy was haughty and proud. Elizabeth had detected not the slightest hint of haughtiness in Miss Darcy. It pained Elizabeth knowing she had believed the false testimony of the man who had been the means of breaking the young woman's heart. She silently prayed there would be no lasting effects of Wickham's treachery on young Miss Darcy's ability to trust and one day fall in love again. With such a kind and patient brother as Mr. Darcy to guide her path, no doubt Miss Darcy's happiness is assured. Watching the young woman conversing with Mrs. Gardiner, some thought of who else might be influencing Miss Darcy's life entered Elizabeth's mind. Colonel Fitzwilliam, her co-guardian, along with Mr. Darcy to be sure, Elizabeth surmised. What of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, or Mr. Darcy's other aunt, the Countess of Matlock? Heaven forbid Mr. Charles Bingley's pernicious sister, Miss Caroline Bingley, might influence Miss Darcy. Before Elizabeth had time to dwell on that particular line of thinking, another guest was shown into the room, Mr. Charles Bingley himself. As this was the gentleman's first occasion of meeting the Gardiners, the introductions were made in the usual way. It did not take Elizabeth long to detect a change in the young man. He was anything but the jovial, amiable gentleman whom Elizabeth recalled. Indeed, he was rather shy, smiling just a little, and awkwardly at that, and saying even less. Does his altered state have anything to do with his guilt in having taken his leave of Hertfordshire on the morning after his ball, and his failure to return when he said he would? Seeing him in the same room with young Miss Darcy confirmed that which Elizabeth was always certain she already knew, for there was no symptom of love between the two of them whatsoever. Miss Bingley had lied about her brother's feelings for the young woman in her letter to Jane, telling her that Mr. Bingley had no plans to return to Hertfordshire. Indeed, through the entirety of the morning visit, the two of them had not spoken to each other at all. There were certainly no stolen glances between them, for when Miss Darcy was not looking at her brother as though silently taking her cues from him on how she ought to act, she was either looking about the room or at times looking at the floor. Elizabeth was amazed indeed when Charles Bingley called on her soon after he had taken an earlier leave with the Darcys. Though the Gardiners were out, she was perfectly happy to receive him, supposing he had likely come to retrieve something he had left behind during his earlier visit. Glancing about the room, she could not imagine what that might be. The gentleman's real purpose soon became apparent. "Miss Bennet," he began, "I fear I owe you and your family, your eldest sister especially, a great apology for not returning to Hertfordshire as I had promised. I fear there has been something of a misunderstanding, though hardly an excuse, mind you." "A misunderstanding?" Bingley nodded. I allowed myself to be persuaded that returning to Hertfordshire was in no one's best interests, that I was misguided in my belief that your eldest sister cared for me, although, if such is indeed the case after the manner of my behavior and my continued absence, then I have no one to blame but myself. I should have relied on my own counsel, and thus followed my own heart. "Are you saying that you have knowledge of my sister's true feelings? Knowledge which you have chosen not to act upon?" "Knowledge I only received on the way here to see you." Darcy felt it incumbent upon him to lay out the whole of it. "Mr. Darcy? This morning?" "Indeed, he even confessed to having knowledge of your sister's being in Cheapside earlier this year, very likely in the hopes of seeing me. He confessed your part in enlightening him to your sister's true feelings, which is why I made some excuse about having to remain in Lambton a while longer this morning. I wanted to see you, to speak with you in privacy." Bingley, who had been standing by the fireplace, approached Elizabeth. "Pray, Miss Bennet, tell me at once, have your sister's feelings for me, have they suffered a material change for the worse? Have I a chance, or is she lost to me forever?" Though exceedingly pleased by what the gentleman's words portended, Elizabeth maintained a calm composure. "Sir, I am afraid it is not my place to tell you exactly what my sister's feelings may or may not be. However, I believe were such a question to be posed to her in person, you would not be dissatisfied by her response." It was enough said. Just as quickly as that, the Charles Bingley that Elizabeth had once admired so much stood before her once again. She suspected, rather than knew, that were they in Hertfordshire, he would be out the door. But they were in Derbyshire, several days of steady travelling away. "Oh, Miss Bennet, Miss Elizabeth, I cannot tell you how happy I am to hear that. I can hardly wait to see Miss Bennet again. Indeed, I believe I shall prepare for my departure this very afternoon." "But, sir, I was given to believe you had planned to remain in Derbyshire for at least a month before heading to Scarborough for the rest of the summer." "To be perfectly frank, time and distance away from my friend Darcy and my dear sister Caroline are precisely what I need. As for Scarborough, with luck, the next time I visit my relations in the north, I shall be accompanied by the woman whom I love." Elizabeth's joy in hearing this was beyond expression. "Then, by all means, do not allow me to delay you, sir. Knowing that I may still have a chance with Miss Bennet, I will not allow anything or anyone to stand in my way from this moment forward. But you must promise me something before I take my leave." "Pray, what is that, sir?" Elizabeth asked, ready and willing to be of service. "I know how close you and your sister have always been. Indeed, it is but one of the things I admire most about you, your unflinching loyalty to your sister. Saying that, I beg you not to write to her or anyone else in Hertfordshire of my imminent return." Elizabeth wished she could say she was not in the habit of keeping secrets from Jane, but that would be a lie. It seemed all she had done was keep secrets from Jane, especially regarding this particular affair. She had, of course, told Jane about seeing Mr. Darcy in Kent. She had even told Jane that she had rejected the gentleman's proposal, even though she had allowed some time to pass before doing so. She had not uttered a single word about Mr. Darcy's role in keeping Jane and Bingley apart, and now she did not have to. "You may rely upon my discretion, sir. Besides, I wager your arrival in Hertfordshire will be far timelier than even the fastest express." Soon after Bingley quit the room, Elizabeth looked outside the window and saw him hurrying off on horseback. She could not help smiling on behalf of her sister Jane and delighting in the joy of the happy reunion that awaited. Elizabeth's thoughts quickly drifted from Jane's future felicity to what her own might have been. Her curiosity over the timing of Mr. Darcy's confession to his friend would not be repressed, and she could not help but wonder if what he had been done on her own behalf. She was hours away from receiving her answer, for Miss Darcy had invited Elizabeth and her relations to dine at Pemberley that very evening. Once again, supposing she was reading too much into the situation, Elizabeth silently cautioned herself to be sensible. Mr. Darcy was just as kind and attentive to Elizabeth and her relations during his morning call as he had been the day before, which surely meant something. Let me see how he behaves this evening, and then I shall know how to think, and most importantly, how to feel. Chapter 6. The rain that Mrs. Gardiner had prognosticated the day before arrived on the heels of their arrival at Pemberley, accompanied by violent lightning, roaring thunder, and fierce winds. The duration of the torrential downpour rendered it unwise for the Gardiner party to return to Lambton in the midst of it all. Thus, an invitation to stay at Pemberley was extended, and likewise accepted. "This is going to be a long night," Elizabeth silently considered as she surveyed the drawing-room after dinner. As this particular room had not been part of the public tour, she was once again impressed with all she saw: majestic ceilings, tall doors and walls trimmed in gold, rich Persian carpets cushioning her feet, and towering bouquets of freshly cut flowers in vibrant colors of red, white, orange, and yellow, purposely arranged on ornate, marble-topped tables all about. Once again, she reminded herself that of all this she might have been mistress, willing herself to dwell upon anything but what might have been. She directed her attention instead to the various occupants in the room. Elizabeth observed that young Miss Darcy was painfully uncomfortable in her role as the hostess in her brother's home, and thus relied heavily upon her companion, Mrs. Ainsley's guidance. Not too much unlike Miss Ann de Bourgh's depending upon her companion, Mrs. Jenkins, Elizabeth surmised, having studied the young lady while at Rosings. Elizabeth laughed a little and sighed. "I suppose Lady Catherine commands such a considerable share of mendacity as to leave none to spare for the next generation of Fitzwilliam women." Elizabeth could almost feel Miss Caroline Bingley glaring at her the entire evening, but the latter had remained somewhat subdued, perhaps even pleasant, at least toward Elizabeth's relations. So long as the young woman was not disparaging of her relations, Elizabeth could have no cause to repine. As for Miss Bingley's silent treatment toward Elizabeth, the latter welcomed the verbal reprieve. Her good fortune ended all too soon when, at length, Miss Bingley came to the part of the room where Elizabeth was sitting. "May I prevail upon you for a turn around the room, Miss Eliza? I do so miss our little tete-a-tete." As much as Elizabeth did not want to take part in whatever scheme the young lady had to garner Mr. Darcy's attention, the same stratagem she had employed to her own disadvantage when they were all in Hertfordshire last autumn, Elizabeth felt she had no choice. She was determined to match Miss Bingley's feigned civility, which the latter had no doubt practiced for Miss Darcy's sake. Half smiling, Elizabeth arose from her seat, accepted Miss Bingley's proffered arm, and the ladies began a slow promenade about the spacious room. Miss Bingley said, "I understand your friend Charlotte is now the wife of Lady Catherine de Bourgh's vicar, Mr. William Collins." Elizabeth nodded. "Indeed. I wish I had an intimate friend whose home abutted the great lady's estate, so that I might have had the privilege of being a frequent guest at Rosings, although I do suppose it would prove rather awkward for Miss Ann de Bourgh." Elizabeth looked at her walking companion questioningly. "Why, you are aware that she and her mother like to suppose that Miss de Bourgh is engaged to our Mr. Darcy, are you not? Although on the sole occasion I have been in company with the two of them, when we dined at Mr. Darcy's London town-house, I detected absolutely no symptom of affection between the two. He has always been far more attentive to me." Elizabeth laughed a little at the lady's professed observation, for she was confident that if Mr. Darcy showed Miss Bingley even the tiniest sliver of affection, the young lady would be ordering wedding clothes. Miss Bingley was not insensitive to Elizabeth's reaction. "Do tell me what you find so amusing, Miss Eliza, so I, too, might enjoy my share of fun." Elizabeth said, "You must pardon me. I am afraid my mind was elsewhere." An awkward silence ensued, which at length was broken by threadbare conversation, which soon gave way to a particularly pointed speech once the two ladies were far enough away from the others to prevent being overheard. "I suppose I have you to thank for my brother's hasty departure from Derbyshire earlier today." Elizabeth regarded the other woman questioningly. "Do you pretend that you were not responsible for his leave-taking? I am very aware that he called on you in Lambton this morning with Mr. Darcy and Miss Darcy. I also have it on good authority that Charles called on you again, not very long after taking his leave with the Darcys." How on earth does Miss Bingley know about her brother's subsequent visit? Surely she does not spy on her own brother. And if she does, to what avail? Miss Bingley, you speak as though you do not know your brother at all. Taken aback, Miss Bingley cried, why in heavens would you say something as ridiculous as that? We were both present when he boasted aloud that when he makes up his mind to do something, he does it in a moment's notice. Miss Bingley scoffed. I certainly know him well enough to know he relies on the counsel of others, particularly his friend Mr. Darcy. I cannot imagine that Mr. Darcy put the idea of leaving Derbyshire for Hertfordshire in my brother's mind, which leads me to conclude that you were the instigator. Elizabeth laughed a little at this conjecture. I am very aware of how much you love to laugh, Miss Eliza, but as I have said nothing to arouse your wry sense of humor, I beg you to say what is on your mind. Oh, I find it ironic that not only do you know so little about your brother, you know even less about his best friend. I suppose you consider yourself an expert on the gentleman's character, having thrown yourself in his path, and thereby obliging him to call on you this morning, as well as invite you to his home once again this evening. Elizabeth shrugged. I suppose, having spent several weeks earlier this year in his company, I have gained far more insight into his character than our time in Hertfordshire allowed. Miss Bingley stopped abruptly, compelling Elizabeth to do the same. Several weeks? When did this happen? I know your sister was in town, but I do not recall your being there as well. Did I say I spent several weeks in Mr. Darcy's company in town? Elizabeth cried. I ought to have specified that the time we spent in each other's company was when we were in Kent. At his aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh's home? Why, I have never been invited to Rosings Park. If what you are saying is true, then why did you not mention you are enjoying such an honor when I spoke of Rosings a few moments ago? Why should I believe her ladyship would invite such an inconsequential person to her home, even if you are a distant cousin of her vicar? Aside from the fact that I have no reason to lie about visiting Rosings Park, I certainly suffer no obligation to apprise you of my comings and goings. I would mind my tongue if I were you, Miss Eliza. Your falsehoods are easy enough to disprove, but in doing so, I would have to ask Mr. Darcy directly. You and I both know the disguise of any sort is his abhorrence. Should I expose your lies, he might see you and your relations from his home in the blink of the eye, the raging storm or not. Surely you would not want that. Fortunately, for Elizabeth's sake, their debate had drawn Mr. Darcy's attention. She said, Let us speak with Mr. Darcy this instant. Almost pulling her walking companion to where the gentleman sat, Elizabeth stood before him and said, Mr. Darcy, may I prevail on you to join Miss Bingley and me for another turn around the room? I find this exercise most refreshing, but I fear the two of us are in severe want of a gentleman's perspective to temper our desperate opinions on matters having to do with Mr. Bingley's leave-taking, among other things. Mr. Darcy accepted Elizabeth's invitation, and taking his place between the ladies, the three of them proceeded. Miss Bingley was the first to speak. Sir, why did you not tell me that you and Miss Eliza spent so much time in each other's company in Kent? Miss Bingley, when have I ever been in the habit of sharing my comings and goings with you? She jerked her head back. Then you are saying that it is true? You and Miss Eliza were together in Kent? Without awaiting a reply, she scoffed. Well, I would ask how such a fortuitous prospect for Miss Eliza came to be. But then again, she is here at Pemberley. She seems to have a particular knack for finding herself in the same place and at the same times as you. Sir, in informing Miss Bingley of our spending time in Kent, she seemed quite skeptical that a cousin of Lady Catherine de Bourgh's vicar might possibly be a guest in her home. A frequent guest, Mr. Darcy added. How fortunate for you, dear Eliza, Miss Bingley replied. I consider it to have been very fortunate for me as well, said Mr. Darcy. For you, sir? Miss Bingley cried. Pray do not keep me in suspense. Enlighten me on your good fortune. For one, I do not know when my time in Kent was ever so pleasurable. More than that, had Miss Bennet and I not renewed our acquaintance as we did, I might never have fully understood the depths of her elder sister's affections for your brother. Aghast, Miss Bingley cried, Do you mean to say that you told my brother about Miss Jane Bennet's being in town? That you persuaded him to return to Hertfordshire like a lovesick puppy begging for scraps? I told Bingley the truth, the whole truth." Mr. Darcy was looking at Miss Bingley, but Elizabeth knew and understood the words he spoke were spoken for her. "I made a mistake, one that caused another a great deal of heartbreak, and yet another a great deal of consternation. For that I am truly sorry, and I am bound and determined to make amends. Telling Bingley was just the first step of many to come, for I shall do whatever it takes to prove the depths of my sincerity." Hearing this, Miss Bingley was at a rare loss for a fitting retort, and thus did the only thing she could. She quit Darcy and Elizabeth's side, and retreated to the part of the room where she was in nobody's way. Chapter 7. At last, it was just the two of them taking a turn about the room, which suited Elizabeth perfectly, and Mr. Darcy as well, were she to judge by his easy demeanor. Never had she seen him so, which made her regret her part in misjudging him even more. She really liked this side of Mr. Darcy, and she began to wish her time in Derbyshire was of a longer duration than was planned. Though they steadily walked along beside each other in an attitude much the same as when they walked together in Kent, a part of her wished for something more. No doubt Miss Bingley would be clinging to the gentleman like a leash. How he must hate such obsequiousness, women of Miss Bingley's ilk, who are always speaking and looking and thinking for his approbation alone. On the other hand, if I do nothing to encourage him, then how will he know that my feelings are no longer as severe as when we were in Kent? Elizabeth moved a little closer. Whatever were Mr. Darcy's thoughts, he moved a little closer too, and now they were as close as two people walking side by side could be. Before Elizabeth could think to move a bit farther away, their arms brushed against each other's. The warmest sensations flooded her body. Fortunately, no one in the room seemed to be paying attention to what was transpiring between the two of them, not even Miss Bingley. Concerning Miss Bingley's brother, Elizabeth felt it was incumbent upon her to acknowledge Mr. Darcy's recent disclosure. "Sir, I must thank you again and again for telling Mr. Bingley about Jane. Here she paused, not wanting to sacrifice the harmony between them. He must have sensed her struggle. "Miss Elizabeth?" Thus encouraged, she said, "I have no wish to sound impertinent or ungrateful, but—" Again she fell silent. "You and I have come a long way over the past couple of days toward establishing a better understanding of each other's character, have we not? I should like to suppose we have reached a point where we may freely discuss anything. Then I must ask why you waited until today to tell Mr. Bingley, when you have been privy to this intelligence for months." Mr. Darcy took Elizabeth by her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. But rather than linger, as he had done the day before at the carriage, he released it rather quickly. Again, no one in the room noticed his intimate gesture, as best Elizabeth could tell. Her heart, however, slammed against her chest. "I have no excuse other than my belief of Bingley's indifference," Mr. Darcy said. "It would not have been the first time he fancied himself in love only to lose interest in the wake of time and distance from the object of his affections. However, when he learned you were in Derbyshire, the first thing he asked was if your eldest sister had accompanied you. By his rapid change in demeanor to that of a man dying of thirst, about to have his first drink in ages, I knew with certainty that his heart still belonged to Miss Bennet, that he was indeed in love with her. I could no longer keep what I knew hidden from him. I deeply regret not telling him sooner." "Again, I thank you. It is better late than never," Elizabeth said, her eyes willing him to look at her. And when he did just that, she smiled. "Miss Elizabeth, what I am about to ask is undoubtedly presumptuous, but as I am a firm believer that one who never undertook anything never achieved anything, I am compelled to risk it." His melodious voice was such that she could listen to him speak all day and well into the night and never tire of it. "How is it that I never noticed it before?" Elizabeth asked herself. "Or perhaps I did on some level, just as I was too blind to see how physically appealing he is. I was too deaf to hear how wonderfully pleasing his voice is. What is it that you wish to ask me?" "There is a matter of great importance I wish to discuss with you. May I prevail on you to meet me, alone, in the library?" Elizabeth silently commanded her heart to stop racing, her heart and her busy mind. As this would not have been the first time the two of them had spent time alone in a library, Elizabeth appreciated the hypocrisy inherent in a possible protest on the grounds of propriety. Besides, she did not want to protest. Whatever Mr. Darcy wished to say to her, she wished to hear. "How shall such an escape be arranged, Mr. Darcy?" Elizabeth asked, her voice hushed. "I shall make some excuse of needing to speak with my housekeeper. Instead, I will proceed to the library and await your arrival. You do recall where it is located, I trust." "In truth, I cannot say that I do with certainty. Perhaps you will enlighten me," she said half-teasingly. After paying close attention to the gentleman's step-by-step instructions on the quickest route to the library, Elizabeth said, "Well then, sir, I shall endeavor not to make you wait too long." Darcy stood in front of the window watching the pounding rain against the panes. Never had he been so delighted by such a deluge. If it were in his power to control the weather, he would command the elements to continue to do his bidding, thereby keeping Elizabeth a guest in his home for as long as it would take to win her heart. He was already beginning to feel that his mission to win her good opinion was bearing fruit. The manner in which she looked at him that evening almost made him forget the disdain in her eyes when he proposed to her in Kent. Almost. He did not think he could ever quite forget looking into the face of the woman he loved, and not seeing a semblance of affection in return. "I love her still," his heart whispered. "Do I dare confess it? Or do I wait until I am certain such a confession will be met with Elizabeth's approbation?" Seeing the door open from the reflection in the window, Darcy turned and hurried toward Elizabeth, meeting her halfway. "I appreciate you are still away from the rest of our party for a few moments, Miss Elizabeth. I promise I will not take up too much of your time." "You made it sound so important. I dare not deny you your request. And if it were within my power, I would say to take as long as you like. But I fear there are those in our party who might not view our absence very favorably." "You speak of Miss Bingley, no doubt. That is what I wanted to speak with you about. I know how much the two of you did not get along while in Hertfordshire, and now you are forced to endure her company while here at Pemberley. How can I make amends for subjecting you to such a disagreeable situation?" "Sir, I am rather certain Miss Bingley is the one who feels put upon. She is, after all, here by invitation, of a rather long standing, I would imagine, whereas I literally showed up at your doorstep." "I specifically invited Bingley. His sister insinuated herself upon Pemberley, as she is wont to do. One word from you, and I will encourage her to be on her way." "Oh, no! I would never impose my will on another, merely for the sake of my own convenience. Besides, my aunt and uncle will no doubt wish to resume their travels as soon as can be, for there are quite a few places here in Derbyshire that we have yet to visit. Perhaps I might borrow a page from Miss Bingley's book and insinuate myself on your party. What would be better than to have someone who knows all the ins and outs of this part of the world accompany you on your journey?" "Sir, you are very kind. I would imagine you have far better things to do with your time than to spend it visiting places with which you are already intimately familiar. I confess that it has been some time since I traversed the Derbyshire countryside, and nothing would give me more pleasure than to revisit old favorites with you." Elizabeth hardly knew what to say or do in the wake of Mr. Darcy's confession. She had to admit that seeing this side of him was intriguing. Besides, how could she possibly complain about the prospect of their party of 3 becoming an evenly matched party of 4? Gone would be the necessity on her aunt's part to feel as though they needed to focus on entertaining her. With Mr. Darcy to divert her, Elizabeth's relations could spend their time more agreeably engaged in focusing upon each other. "Mr. Darcy," she began, "speaking for myself and my relations as well, I believe it will be a pleasure to have you join us. That is, assuming you are sincere." "I can think of nothing that would bring me more pleasure." Her spirits rising to playfulness, Elizabeth said, "I suppose we have Miss Bingley to thank for your enthusiasm to be away from Pemberley. Though the thought of being away from Miss Bingley is a strong inducement indeed. But in suggesting that I might join you on the next part of your tour, I believe I thought only of the two of us." Chapter 8. Mr. Gardiner was astounded when the master of Pemberley asked to accompany them on their tour of those parts of Derbyshire they had yet to explore. He told his wife as much when they were alone. "Mr. Darcy is an extraordinary gentleman. I have to wonder why our niece was so hesitant to tour his home in light of their behavior toward each other." He rubbed his chin. "You do not suppose there is more to her initial reluctance than she admitted, do you, my dear?" "More, Mr. Gardiner? What are you thinking?" "I am thinking there is a great deal more affection between my niece and Mr. Darcy than either of them would have us believe. I know that the two of them have an acquaintance, which started when he first arrived in Hertfordshire. I was under the impression that she did not like him at all, owing to his rather unflattering remarks about her." Wanting very much to learn all she could about her husband's opinion of Mr. Darcy, without saying or doing anything to break her promise to Elizabeth, Mrs. Gardiner said, "I was not aware that you were so familiar with the history between those two." Mr. Gardiner scoffed. "Do you really think my sister would keep such an insult as one of her daughters not being handsome enough to tempt any young man a secret?" His lady laughed a little. "I suppose you have a point." "I would say, whatever might have been the gentleman's initial impression of our Lizzie, it has certainly undergone a significant change. I also do not mind confessing that this newfound regard gives me pause." "Why is that, my dear?" Mrs. Gardiner beseeched. "These great men are in the habit of getting whatever they want, or in this case, whomever they want, whenever and however they want. I shall hate to see our niece being taken in. You have always been rather protective of her. But I would not worry too much in that regard were I you. Lizzie has a good head on her shoulders. She knows what she is about. And while we are only getting to know Mr. Darcy, he and Lizzie are very well acquainted. You are aware they spent a prodigious amount of time in each other's company while in Kent, are you not? Perhaps that is even more reason to be concerned. Come now, Mr. Gardiner, this is Lizzie whom we are speaking of, not Lydia or Kitty. Besides, there is something about Mr. Darcy when he speaks, something rather pleasing about his mouth, and something of dignity in his countenance that gives a glimpse into his goodness. Our Lizzie is quite safe with him." Mr. Gardiner released a deep breath. "If you say so, my dear." Smiling, Miss Gardiner said, "I do. Now, come let us retire for the evening, for I believe we have a big day in store. As much as I love Derbyshire, and enjoying being once again in this part of the country, I, for one, look forward to seeing it again through Mr. Darcy's eyes. I believe we are in for quite an adventure." Chapter 9. Whether purposely or unknowingly. Darcy and Elizabeth grew farther and farther apart from Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner with each step they took, and understandably so. Being in a place where neither of them could have imagined being a week ago was almost hard to fathom. That they would be enjoying each other's company was equally inconceivable. "I do not mind confessing how pleased I am to be spending today with you, Miss Elizabeth," Mr. Darcy began. "I also admit that doing so affords me a great deal of pleasure, but also some measure of regret. I do not wish to dwell on the manner in which we parted in Kent, but I cannot help but reflect on how different things might have unfolded had I behaved more gentlemanly. Well, sir, since you broached the subject, I am obliged to tell you that I am not very proud of my own behavior toward you. What did you say to me that I did not deserve? Having spent time with your relations, I realized how wrong I was to think meanly of your connections. I am certain, had I put forth more effort while in Hertfordshire, I may have better appreciated your immediate family as well, specifically your mother, who, no doubt, only wants the best for her daughters. I well understand how my mother's exuberance might have been misconstrued. If you promise never to mention what I am about to confide, I will share a secret with you." "You have my word." "I could never really blame you or anyone else for suffering reservations where my mother is concerned. Even I find myself frequently overwhelmed by her constant complaints. Her woes are truly more than anyone deserves. That said, the business of her life is indeed marrying her 5 daughters. With the entail on my father's estate being such that it is, I can scarcely blame her despite the very real fact that I have done nothing to make her burden any easier. My cousin, Mr. Collins, stands to inherit Longbourn in the advent of my father's demise. He would be well within his rights to toss my entire family into the hedgerows with scarcely a moment's notice, were he to choose to do so. I never supposed you felt that way. Saying that, I really ought not to be surprised. Your liveliness of spirits would likely place you in grave danger of misery of the acutest kind, were you to allow another to dictate how you should live your life or with whom. Elizabeth made no response, no doubt giving her companion cause for concern. I hope I do not speak out of turn. No, sir, she replied softly. Yet you seem troubled. What is on your mind? Well, sir, other than Jane and most recently my aunt, I have told no one what unfolded between the two of us in Kent. My mother would be livid. No, that is not the right word. She would be mortified, horrified, and severely wounded were she to learn of it. Now it was Mr. Darcy's turn to be silent. He moistened his lower lip. He arched his brow. Sir, Elizabeth said, trying to summon his attention, I fear you are the one who is now troubled. I do not quite know what to say. I fully expected you to confide in your sister, even Mrs. Collins knowing how intimate the two of you are, and given that you were a guest on that fateful day. I must confess to being a bit taken aback that you confided in your aunt. What must she think of me? You need not suppose she has an unfavorable impression of you. I surely did not share any of the details of what we discussed, only that you professed your love most ardently and offered your hand in marriage, and for reasons having to do with my sister and, of course, Mr. Wickham, I was compelled to refuse you. And your aunt knows that I am most ardently in love with you, Miss Elizabeth? Mr. Darcy asked, half questioningly, half concerned. I told her that you professed your love to me when we were together in Kent. After my refusal, I had no reason to assume that your feelings had not changed. My feelings for you have not changed. Try as I might during the months since we parted, I could not help thinking of you, missing you, regretting you, and praying for a way to stop, while secretly clinging to thoughts of what might have been. I had no idea, sir. Miss Elizabeth, I know our time here in Derbyshire has been of a short duration, but these past days in company with you have meant more to me than you can imagine. Dare I hope that your feelings are akin to mine? Dare I hope that I have a chance to win your heart? If yes, pray tell me at once. Else, as much as it would pain me, I shall remain silent on this particular subject forever. Elizabeth could hardly believe what she was hearing. Until that moment, she never willingly allowed herself to imagine hearing such a profession from the man whom she had suffered regret. True, he had not proposed the marriage. Only time would tell whether such an offer was forthcoming. A silent tear traced its way down her cheek. Yes, Elizabeth said. Their eyes met, and she trembled deep down inside. Yes. Mr. Darcy leaned closer and gently wiped away her tear. His own eyes were teeming with tenderness, with love, and with desire. Yes, I have a chance. Elizabeth nodded, with overwhelming odds for success. Chapter 10. Tacitly understanding that she had an advocate in her aunt, Mrs. Gardiner. It was no surprise to Elizabeth that she and her relations were guests at Pemberley for the next few days and nights. Besides, such an arrangement made exploring the sights of Derbyshire so much more convenient for everyone concerned. Elizabeth never imagined that rocks and mountains could be so diverting. But then again, she never imagined she would be seeing them with Mr. Darcy by her side, which must surely have added to their allure. As he had done on the first evening of Elizabeth's stay at Pemberley, Darcy requested time alone with her on that particular evening as well. The promise of a moonlit midnight stroll was simply too tempting for Elizabeth to refuse. Indeed, she might have suggested it herself after staying up half the night before on the balcony, staring up at the bright full moon, and wishing Mr. Darcy was with her. Walking along beside each other, guided by the light of the most romantic moon she had ever beheld, Elizabeth and her companion came to a place in a wide open field, where a large blanket and a basket meant for two awaited them. Her heart slammed against her chest in anticipation of what such a gesture on his part suggested, but she was far too intrigued by the possibilities to feign protest. Few words were spoken between them as he led her to the blanket. The two of them sat close enough to feel the heat from each other's body. Soon enough, he poured 2 goblets of wine. Handing one to Elizabeth, Mr. Darcy said, "I understand your relations are planning to leave Derbyshire within the next couple of days, taking you with them." Elizabeth nodded. Darcy was persuaded by the look in her eyes that she was just as unhappy about their imminent separation as he was. "I really do not want you to leave. At the risk of it being too soon, I have to ask, will you say that you will stay with me here in Derbyshire, at Pemberley? What of decorum? Am I to pretend I am your sister's guest as a way of explaining my presence?" Mr. Darcy began, "I want you to stay with me at Pemberley as my wife. Miss Elizabeth, I have asked you before, and now I ask you once more. Will you do me the honor of accepting my hand in marriage?" Setting her glass aside, Elizabeth took Mr. Darcy's hand in hers, and raising it to her lips, brushed a loving kiss across his knuckles. Looking into his eyes, she said, "Can there be any doubt, Mr. Darcy?" He moistened his lips. "I need to hear you say the words, that I might remember the sound of them forever." "Yes, sir. I shall be honored to be your wife. And here is something more to remember for all time, as I surely will. I have fallen in love with you most ardently, and with all my heart and soul." Darcy's response, in hearing Elizabeth's declaration, and the happiness which this reply produced, was such as he had probably never felt before, and he expressed himself on the occasion as sensibly and as warmly as a man violently in love can be supposed to do. Elizabeth had spent far too much time in Mr. Darcy's company during the past several days, exchanging long looks, suffering incidental brushes of their hands, their arms, and at times their bodies against each other's, not to yearn for something more, even if she did not know exactly what something more entailed, not to surrender to Mr. Darcy's tender ministrations. Affectionate kisses about her face, her lips, her neckline grew ever so passionate. The night air, conspiring with the bright full moon, fueled their desire for each other in a manner neither might have expected, and in keeping with the promise of sharing the rest of their lives with each other, neither of them objected. Feeling his gentle hands on either side of her face, Elizabeth raised her head, yearning for what was to come. Their eyes met. The brooding she completely mistook in the past, she now understood as deep longing, intense passion, unyielding affection, and abiding love. Their ardent desire for each other unleashed, the lovers continued in this manner for some time, giving Elizabeth little doubt of the satisfaction that awaited her as a wife of Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. "I want this night to last forever," he whispered softly in her ear. Thus the lovers behaved until sleep overtook them. The dawn of morning awakened them from a blissful slumber in each other's arms. There they lay, the two of them, having spent their first night together, not exactly as one, but certainly in a manner which persuaded both of them that they never wished to be parted from each other again. Chapter 11. Upon returning to the manor house some hours later, Elizabeth learned that her aunt and uncle had taken an early breakfast and then ventured to Lambton to call on old friends and acquaintances. 2 letters from Jane awaited her. Upon retrieving them, she scrutinized them to see which had been received first, and hence determined the order in which she should read them. Mr. Darcy, who was standing by Elizabeth's side, watching her examine her sister's letters, said, "Shall I leave you in privacy to read your sister's correspondence?" In no hurry to be separated from her newly betrothed, Elizabeth shook her head. "I assure you no privacy is needed. The first letter was posted several days ago. It was initially sent to Lambton and ultimately sent here. The second was posted the day hence. I am confident my sister writes to tell me of Mr. Bingley's imminent return, in the first, and all the felicity she has suffered in the wake of his arrival, in the second. Stay with me, if you will, while I read, so that the parts that have to do with your friend Mr. Bingley can be relayed to you immediately, and then you will know you did the right thing in telling him about my sister's feelings. In the spirit of sparing my own suspense, I accept your invitation. With that settled, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy sat on the settee in a manner in keeping with their newly acknowledged affection for each other, and the former commenced reading in silence. Darcy waited patiently for his intended to begin sharing happy intelligence about his friend and her sister. But such information was never imparted. Instead, Elizabeth's color grew paler and paler by the second, prompting Mr. Darcy to ask, "Is something the matter, my love? You look unwell." She looked up from her letter with tears in her eyes. Elizabeth bit her lower lip, her whole attitude a stark difference from what it had been when she started reading. "Shall I get you a glass of wine, perhaps? Whatever your sister wrote in your letter must be a cause for great consternation." Now crying, Elizabeth shook her head. "Consternation, condemnation, and utterly and complete ruination from my family. Good God, what has happened?" "It is my youngest sister, Lydia," Elizabeth began. "She has thrown herself into the power of Mr. Wickham. The two of them have gone off to Scotland, presumably to elope, according to Jane's letter, but I can scarcely believe it is true. You and I both know Wickham too well to suppose it to be true." Elizabeth burst into tears. "I fear Lydia is lost to us forever." Not wanting to see Elizabeth in distress, Mr. Darcy said, "The second letter. You said it was posted the following day. Perhaps there is good news. Perhaps the two of them have been found." Elizabeth seized hold of the second letter as though it were the means of her family's salvation. She nodded nervously. "Yes, yes. Jane said her father went out in search of the two of them. Perhaps he met with a great measure of success. The intelligence conveyed in the second letter was twice as devastating as that in the first, for it removed every last shred of hope. The Bennet family had since learned that Wickham had never intended to marry Lydia. Too much time had passed since Lydia had last been seen for Elizabeth to do anything other than think the worst. "Foolish, foolish Lydia," Elizabeth cried. "What have you done?" She now paced the floor. "What have I done?" "Come, my love, sit and have a drink of wine. I fear you are making yourself quite ill." "Sir, pray do not call me that." "I beg your pardon. Please refrain from referring to me in such terms of endearment. Owing to my sister's foolishness, I fear everything has changed." "Certainly not between the two of us." "Especially between the two of us," she exclaimed with energy. "How so, if I may ask?" "Whatever the outcome of Lydia's rash behavior, it will be in every way bad. Either she has been ruined by that scoundrel, Mr. Wickham, or she is married to him, which is worse than being ruined so far as I am concerned. Whatever is the situation between your sister, and for her sake, I pray it is the latter, that they have indeed eloped to Gretna Green. It can have nothing to do with the two of us and the future we have planned." "No, sir, you are gravely mistaken. My sister's fate is invariably connected with hers. My family's reputation is on the verge of being tarnished should Wickham abandon Lydia in some God-forsaken part of the country. Were they actually to marry, which I can have no reason to suppose they will, for Lydia has no money, no connections, absolutely nothing that might tempt him. If they were to marry despite all these reasons to the contrary, then Wickham would have become a part of my family. Do you really suppose I would force you to align yourself with such a scandalous connection when it is within my power to do otherwise, that being to release you from our engagement, now, before the painful truth can no longer be contained?" She shook her head. "No, I cannot marry you, Mr. Darcy, and I shall not," Elizabeth exclaimed with more feeling than politeness. "Elizabeth, think about what you are saying. I have not been in the habit of submitting to anyone's will other than my own. I will marry you because I love you most ardently. I want to marry you because I cannot imagine my life without you. Wickham or no Wickham, you and I are meant to be together. I will let nothing tear us apart." "No, sir, I am afraid it is beyond your power to prevent me from doing what you and I both know deep within our hearts is the right thing to do. It is not that I do not love you. If I have learned nothing else from this beautiful time we have spent together, I have learned just how much I care for you. Despite all the odds against us, the possible derision of your family and your friends, I really believe we could be happy. Elizabeth, we can be happy. We are happy together. You are merely confused by what your sister has done. You are worried about her safety, as you most certainly ought to be. But pray, Do anything but allow your despair over that which is beyond your power to effect cloud your judgment. If anything has clouded my judgment, sir, it is the time we have spent together these past days. The truth is, you never really liked my family for the very reason that has unfolded. If you would but be honest, this is just the sort of scheme that you believed my family capable of. It is the very essence of the struggle you confessed that evening at the parsonage. And, if I am to be honest with myself, it is just the sort of situation I too have come to expect. Lydia only wanted opportunity to make herself and thus our whole family ridiculous. Having taken Darcy's letter explaining his motives for his treatment of Wickham to heart, Elizabeth could not help but hearken back to her pleading with her father not to allow Lydia to travel to Brighton with no supervision other than that of a young woman, although married, who was barely older than Lydia herself. Mr. Bennet, being the type of father who relished the solace that would be afforded by Lydia, with her wild animal spirits being away from Longbourn, could simply not be persuaded. He had even attributed Elizabeth's objection to the preservation of her own self-interest, saying, "Has Lydia frightened away some of your lovers? Poor little Lizzie." Now, there she stood doing her best to push away the one man she was meant to love. "I will not allow you to do this to us," Mr. Darcy insisted. "After last night, do you really suppose I would turn my back on you?" Elizabeth could feel the color rise all over her body. The liberties she had allowed Mr. Darcy, as their passions swelled during the heat of the night when they stole away for a midnight stroll, flooded her mind. She moistened her lips in remembrance of how perfect it had been when his lips brushed ever so gently over hers, how he had tenderly persuaded her lips apart, and how she had welcomed his tongue in a tantalizing dance with her own. Elizabeth's heartbeat raced. Her body suffered feelings akin to those she had enjoyed in his arms the evening before, even though they were now standing some distance apart, a distance that was slowly being removed as Mr. Darcy drew closer and closer. Did he mean to take her in his arms? Did he yearn for her touch as much as she yearned for his? His eyes said yes. Her aching body cried out for the comfort and strength of his strong arms. Her busy mind surrendered to the turmoil of what her sister had done, to what she had done. She eased back a step. "Sir, that is all the more reason for me to release you from our engagement. I know we were sensible enough not to anticipate our vows, but for the strength of your own sense of right and wrong did we keep ourselves under good regulation. Lydia has always been wild and possessed such animal spirits. I can have no doubt as to how she has comported herself. My behavior was scarcely any more appropriate than my sister's. I believe you will thank me, in the long run, for my decision to release you. Your behavior and your sister's behavior are not to be compared. She is but a child, not yet 16, if I recall correctly. She is too young to comprehend the magnitude of what she has done. You are a woman, a sensuous, passionate woman, with a woman's desires you chose not to hide from me. And I love you all the more because of it. You are everything I could ever wish for in a wife, and my wife. I refuse to allow something like this, as controversial and consequential as it is, to come between us. I am afraid that is your misfortune, sir." "No," he said, taking a step closer. "Yes," Elizabeth said, easing back further until there was nowhere left to go. Closing all the distance between them, Darcy drew Elizabeth into his arms. He studied her eyes as though searching her very soul. Moistening his lips, peering into her eyes, he leaned closer, shutting his eyes. Elizabeth did the same. She surrendered to her heart's longing and her body's yearning, and willingly so, for she would never forgive herself if she did not enjoy just one last kiss. Chapter 12. Mrs. Gardiner said, "I know how troubled you were over the possibility of seeing Mr. Darcy, but I also suspect there was some tiny part of you that dared to ask yourself, what if? What if you were to encounter the gentleman at Pemberley? What if the feelings he professed to you in Kent were still there? What if he would offer his hand in marriage again? And now you tell me that all those possibilities have indeed unfolded? that you are engaged to marry the master of Pemberley, to be the mistress of his home and the mother of his children. And because of Lydia's foolishness, you are prepared to throw it all away? To sacrifice your own happiness for the sake of what? For propriety? To spare Mr. Darcy, the one man on earth who loves you as ardently as he does, so that he might escape the derision and shame of being connected to such a family as ours? Who in our family has ever doubted for a second that the position that Lydia now finds herself in is precisely as it was always meant to be? She only wanted opportunity, and she was bound to find it sooner or later. In this case, it was much sooner than any of us would have expected. But expected we did. Has it thus been a foregone conclusion that your own happiness was meant to rest in Lydia's hands? I think not. With time, this scandal one day shall pass. But the heartbreak you are inviting upon yourself in breaking your engagement with Mr. Darcy might very well last a lifetime. Elizabeth said nothing for the entirety of Mrs. Gardiner's speech, but her busy mind could not acquiesce. As comforting as my aunt's words are, I fear they are spoken in vain. Mr. Darcy deserves better than I am at present able to offer. I know with complete certainty that he will come to know it too. In the wake of her niece's continued silence, Mrs. Gardiner said, "Perhaps the thought of what your life with a man like Mr. Darcy entails frightens you. Perhaps you do not believe you deserve all the happiness that awaits you. Let me assure you, dearest Lizzie, that no one is more deserving than you. No one is loved more than Mr. Darcy loves you. I have known how much he loves you from the moment I laid eyes on the two of you together. Be scared, be nervous, I dare say, be confused, especially in light of the uncertainty that lies ahead for our family. But whatever you do not throw away the certainty of a life full of happiness with Mr. Darcy." At length Elizabeth spoke. "You have certainly given me much to consider, dear aunt. I am so grateful for your counsel at such a time as this. I believe I know what I must do. I asked Mr. Darcy's driver to await my return, so I might go back to Pemberley. I need to see Mr. Darcy. I know that we have not much time to tarry. If we are to depart from Lambton for Hertfordshire, I shall not be gone long. You run along, my dearest. I shall see that your things are packed for our departure." Elizabeth headed for the door and then stopped. "Pray say nothing of Mr. Darcy's proposal to my uncle, not before I return." She sucked in her breath. "I hate putting you in this position of keeping secrets from your own husband, but I would much prefer to tell him myself with Mr. Darcy by my side." She took comfort in the fact that in this case she was not lying to her dearest aunt. Were she indeed to marry Mr. Darcy, then she would want him by her side when she shared the news with her uncle. On her quitting the room, Elizabeth was scarcely able to support herself. She fought back her tears. A full day had not passed since Mr. Darcy renewed his proposal, and she accepted. Now it seems that blissful moment existed several lifetimes ago. If Elizabeth had but one consolation, it was the memory of the touch of his fingers on her face, and the look in his eyes just moments before their very first kiss. If she took but one thing away from her trip in Derbyshire, then surely it would be this. Chapter 13. Hours had passed since Darcy and Elizabeth had separated so she might seek out her relations in Lambton. He had offered to go with her, nay, insisted, but was persuaded, by the strength of her convictions, that it was much better for all concerned that her family should hear the unhappy news apart from a gentleman with whom they had only recently established an acquaintance. At least he had persuaded her to accept the offer of a Darcy carriage and the attendance of one of Pemberley's maids for the short trip to Lambton. Darcy planned to meet his betrothed and her relations once the latter had digested the news of what Lydia had done, at which point he would have a private audience with Mr. Gardiner to decide what was to be done. In truth, he wanted nothing more than to be by Elizabeth's side as she spoke to her aunt and uncle but he respected and trusted her enough to know that she knew best in this particular situation how the matter ought to be handled. A gentleman who had always been looked upon to bear the brunt of such weighty matters, especially where his own family was concerned. It seemed the hardest thing he had ever done was allowing his lady to walk away with little more than a polite curtsy in view of their surroundings and a tacit promise that their reunion was a short time in coming. Having taken the stairs in the Lambton Inn where Elizabeth and her relations had kept their rooms, despite their brief stay at Pemberley and days-long tour of Derbyshire, Mr. Darcy stood outside the door, his hat in one hand and his other poised to knock, when the door flew open. "Mr. Darcy," Mr. Gardiner said. "Sir, I had not planned to see you. I fear we have received grave news indeed. I am afraid our departure from this part of the country cannot be delayed a day longer, for we will surely be too late to—" Darcy nodded. I know, sir. That is in part the reason I am here." Mr. Gardiner's countenance clouded. "I am afraid I do not understand, sir." "Miss Elizabeth, I was with her when she received the unhappy news about her sister." The other gentleman looked taken aback. His complexion colored. Seeing this, Darcy said, "You look disturbed, sir. I know this is a family matter, one which ought to be confided in as few people as possible. I assure you that you may rely upon my discretion." No, it is not that, sir. Indeed, I would expect nothing less of you." "Then pray what is the matter?" And by your— Awkwardly aware that their conversation was much too sensitive to continue while standing in the hallway, Darcy asked, "May I come inside?" Mr. Gardiner gasped, no doubt due to his lack of etiquette. He opened the door wider and, stepping aside, he encouraged Darcy to enter the room. "Pray forgive my manners." Darcy nodded his head knowingly. Once inside, he threw a quick glance about the room, hoping to see his lady, only to find it empty instead. He cleared his throat. "As I was about to say, you seem to have been taken aback by my confession of knowing about Miss Lydia and Mr. Wickham." "It is because I was. Did Miss Elizabeth not tell you about our being together when she received the letters from Hertfordshire, that I would come here to discuss what is to be done?" Mr. Gardiner shook his head. "No, my niece did not say anything, save that the letters were diverted to Pemberley, and upon reading them, she borrowed one of your carriages and came here straight away." Now it was Darcy's turn to be confused. Why would Elizabeth not wish for her relations to know she had confided the entirety of what Miss Lydia had done to me? "I pray you do not mind my knowing, and I further hope you will accept my offer of assistance to you and your family to help locate Miss Lydia." "I do not know quite what to say, Mr. Darcy. Such unparalleled generosity towards someone so wholly unconnected to you as we are is beyond anything I could ever hope for. As much as I believe we shall require every resource we can muster, I do not believe it would be proper to prevail on you in such a manner. Much as I respect you, indeed, both my wife and I, and my niece as well, I believe I speak for all of us in saying you owe us nothing." "Mr. Gardiner, I beg to differ. There is another purpose for my visit here beyond my offering to be of service to you and your family, one that cannot be delayed a moment longer. May I prevail on you to ask Miss Elizabeth to join us, and your wife as well, for she will be just as interested in what I have to say." "I will be happy to ask my wife to join us, for she is in the adjoining room overseeing the packing for our departure. But as for my niece, I am afraid that will not be possible." Darcy's heart slammed against his chest. What could possibly prevent her from being able to join us? "Is Miss Elizabeth ill? I know she suffered the news quite poorly when we were together earlier." Mr. Gardiner shook his head. "No, my niece is not ill. She is not here." "Not here? Where is she? Where has she gone?" "After she told us about Lydia's elopement, she asked to be excused so she might tend to an important errand." "An errand?" "Lizzie said your carriage was waiting for her, that she was meant to return to Pemberley, and apologize in person for our abrupt departure, after all the kindness you showed us during our time in Derbyshire. You see, sir, I had supposed she would be on her way back to the inn by now, hence my surprise in finding you at the door." Darcy said, "My carriage returned long ago, and Miss Elizabeth most certainly did not return with it. I do not mean to doubt you, sir, but did she really say she was returning to Pemberley?" "Indeed, that is precisely what she said." "Are you sure there was no sign of her at your home?" I made a pointed effort to question the driver, and he assured me that he had delivered Miss Elizabeth to the inn safely. That was some time ago. Both gentlemen's attention was soon drawn to the door of the adjoining room when it flew open. Mrs. Gardiner said, "I thought I heard voices, Mr. Gardiner. Why did you not tell me Mr. Darcy was here?" Darcy and Mrs. Gardiner greeted each other in their usual way under such circumstances. And then she said, "Where in heavens is my niece? I trust the two of you have come from Pemberley together." Mr. Gardiner said, "Our Lizzie did not go to Pemberley. Mr. Darcy has not seen or heard from her in hours, it seems." Mrs. Gardiner's mouth gaped. "Oh, dear!" Chapter 14. My niece is not here. Mr. Gardiner's words had been troubling enough to Mr. Darcy when he first heard them. Now fully aware of the reason behind Elizabeth's absence, he panicked at the thought that the best part of his life was now gone away. Not knowing where she had gone was a cause for great tumult in his mind. Is Elizabeth so determined to release me from our engagement that she would put herself in harm's way? He asked himself the question time and time again as he hurried from the gardener's room in the inn with the gentleman himself in tow. Together, they would search every street, question every stranger, and do whatever necessary to find out where Elizabeth had gone. They supposed it was entirely possible that Elizabeth had simply set out by foot for a solitary stroll. But if that were indeed the situation, then why would she lead her relations to believe otherwise? Sitting around the inn, supposing such a premise to be true, was not an option. Darcy dispatched his driver to return to Pemberley and organized a search party to scour the woods and everywhere else in between Pemberley and Lambton. Next, he spoke with the innkeeper. "I beg your pardon," Darcy began. To say the innkeeper was not immune to the fact that he had been prevailed on by one of the wealthiest owners in Derbyshire was an understatement. He nearly tripped over himself in abandoning his prior employment to be of service to Mr. Darcy. The young lady who accompanied the Gardiners, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, perchance you recall seeing her during the past hour or so? The rotund older gentleman scratched his head. "I'm afraid I haven't, sir. I shall be happy to convey any message to the young lady upon our return." A disturbance in the nearby vicinity of where the two men stood immediately caught their attention. The innkeeper turned and silently scolded a young lady who had dropped a tray piled with dirty plates, half-empty cups, and used silverware. Her expression filled with contrition, laced with embarrassment. She threw a quick glance at the innkeeper before kneeling to clean up the mess she had made. "Sally," the innkeeper said, "you've been attending young Miss Bennet throughout her stay at our fine establishment, haven't you?" She nodded. He summoned her to his side, an order which she seemed reluctant to obey. "But, sir, I fear I must clean up this mess directly." "And you most certainly shall, after I have asked you what I mean to ask you." Her head lowered. She hurried to the innkeeper's side. "What is it, Papa?" "Mr. Darcy here is asking about Miss Bennet's whereabouts. You may be far more familiar with her comings and goings than I am. Would you happen to know where she has gone off to?" Sally lowered her eyes. She bit her lower lip. She said nothing. "Listen to me, daughter. Mr. Darcy is a very important man, one who does not have time to countenance your silly games. If you have information about where Miss Bennet is, then tell me at once." I promise not to utter a word of her whereabouts to anyone." "Mr. Darcy of Pemberley is not just anyone." "I gave my word not to say anything, to Mr. Darcy especially." Darcy said, "Miss, I understand that a promise is a promise, and not meant to be broken. But in such a case as this, you would be wise to do so. I have reason to believe Miss Bennet might have placed herself in great jeopardy by leaving her family without telling them where she was going. Surely you would not wish to see her succumb to an unfortunate fate." "No, sir," Sally replied quickly, shaking her head. "I'd never forgive myself if something bad were to happen to Miss Bennet." The innkeeper said, "Then you know precisely what you must do. You must tell this gentleman everything you know so he will know how to act." "I watched Miss Bennet board the coach." "You did what?" the innkeeper demanded. "Miss Bennet says she no longer wished to remain in Lambton, that she wished to be anywhere but here. So I went with her to the station, and we waited until the first coach was ready to depart, at which point she paid the fare and boarded it. And then I waved goodbye to her as her coach was pulling away. I stayed there until the coach was out of sight. Think carefully, young lady. Did you ascertain the coach's direction? She nodded. It was bound for the neighboring shire. Darcy turned to the innkeeper. Pray see that the gardeners are informed of what has happened. Tell them that I will do everything in my power to return Miss Bennet safely. Hardly waiting for an acknowledgement of his instruction, Darcy was gone directly. Chapter 15. Darcy arrived at the station in the next town some 20 miles or so from Lambton, just in time to see an awaiting coach boarding the last of his passengers. There was no sign of Elizabeth, which, to him, meant one of three things. Either she had boarded already, or she had taken an earlier coach, or she was elsewhere in the local vicinity, having opted to stay there to further elude discovery. Hoping it was the former, and unwilling to chance that it was not, he stopped the public coach just as it was beginning to pull away. Heaven help him should the driver mistake him for a would-be robber. Fortunately for Darcy, the driver did not. He immediately drew his team of horses to a halt. I beg your pardon, Captain. I believe you have a passenger aboard, a young woman who is traveling alone, Darcy shouted. The driver rubbed his chin. I might be. Who's asking? I am Fitzwilliam Darcy of Pemberley. You no doubt have heard of me. The young woman of whom I speak is connected to my family. I mean to come aboard to see if she is inside. Darcy retrieved a small satchel of coins from his pocket and threw it to the driver. For your trouble. Not waiting for any sort of confirmation, Darcy opened the door, looked inside, and exhaled upon seeing Elizabeth's face among the travelers. Even the vexation written all over her face did not diminish his joy. He had no desire to make a scene, but he surely would if Elizabeth meant to be stubborn. May I have a word with you, Miss Bennet? He asked, while doing his best to maintain every appearance of cordiality. How could she possibly refuse such a polite request? When it appeared that Elizabeth intended to maintain her current attitude, Darcy extended his hand to her. Outside, he insisted, taking her hand in his. Reluctantly, and rather begrudgingly, accepting his assistance, Elizabeth stood with the only belongings she brought with her in her free hand. You should not have come, Elizabeth cried with energy, once they were a comfortable distance from the coach. I cannot let you do this. Sir, I know you said that you do not want to be released from our engagement, but I feel it deep in my heart that you will one day thank me for walking away. Did you really think I would let you walk, or better said, run away from me, after the time I have spent with you at Pemberley, after I have had a glimpse of what our life will be, after the words of love that were spoken between us? I could not give you up even if I wanted to. My family is ruined. I just know it. There is nothing to be done to change that. I shall not, and I will not be the means of dragging your good name down too. I beg of you, sir, let me go. Darcy said, even if you insist on throwing everything we have away, I will surely do everything in my power to effect a better outcome for your sister, for your family, and most of all, for you, than is otherwise expected. He drew closer. Elizabeth, my love, even if this situation had not unfolded as it did, trials will come and they will go. Far better that we face this particular one, especially together. I know you are scared amid all the uncertainty of what the future holds for us, even without the added burden of your family's uncertain future. I am scared too. You fear you know nothing about love. At 27, I confess to knowing nothing about love either. You are my first love. You are my woman, my life. Stay with me. Trust me. Love me. Shirking his hand reaching out to her, Elizabeth shook her head. I cannot help but feel this is my fault. Perhaps had I not been so foolishly taken in by Wickham's charms, maybe my youngest sister would not have been such an easy prey. Maybe he would never have given her a passing glance. I posit the sacrifice of my own future felicity is fitting penitence for Lydia's loss of hers. No, Elizabeth, this situation is not one of your making. Why must you pay for a debt you do not owe? Endeavoring to maintain every appearance of composure, she replied, I might ask you the same thing, sir. Because it costs me nothing in the grand scheme of things, except your love if you allow it to. Except a small fortune to persuade Wickham to do the right thing should it come to that. What is all the wealth in the world without the one person who means most to you to share it with? My offering you freedom has nothing to do with my love for you or lack thereof. I believe I will always love you, far too much to attach the shame of my family to your own family's good name. Must the shades of Pemberley be thus polluted? I fear you will end up despising me because of it, as will your family, your sister. No, I will not allow you to use my family's good name as an excuse, and neither would my sister, especially my sister. You know all too well that your own sister's fate might well have been Georgiana's but for my fortuitous arrival in Ramsgate. Darcy could scarcely believe he was on the verge of losing the one woman who meant everything to him. How desperately he wanted to kiss Elizabeth's lips he had studied so ardently the day of his first proposal, to silence her, to succeed in convincing her to trust in his love for her. What if your efforts do not meet with success? Elizabeth asked. I will do my best. And if your best is not good enough? What if my sister is ruined? What if the ensuing shame of everyone connected to her? Our lives will go on, yours and mine, as man and wife. What if your family rejects me because of the scandal? I will never allow anyone to hurt you. And the ensuing harm to you and the opinion of society for having such a wife? What of that? As my wife, I promise you shall have no cause to repine. Fully aware that the coach had not yet left the station, Mr. Darcy signaled the driver to be on his way, and the latter promptly obeyed. At last, there the two of them stood. Mr. Darcy reached out his hand to Elizabeth. Are you with me? At length, Elizabeth accepted his hand, and all that such a gesture entailed. Her place in his heart, with all the love he was willing to give, and a resolve to trust in this man who had pledged his everything to her. Moments later, she surrendered herself into his warm and tender embrace, and with that, the realization that there was indeed no place else on earth she would rather be. Epilogue. After having attempted to run away from a future with Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth had since determined she never wished to part from him again, and thus she accompanied the Gardiners and Mr. Darcy to London, where they were subsequently joined by Mr. Bennet in pursuit of the youngest Bennet daughter. As a consequence, Elizabeth was in town when the wayward couple were discovered living together as though they were man and wife, and in the worst part of London. Having compromised young Lydia and received nothing he could not take from another innocent and unsuspecting young woman, Wickham had made it perfectly clear that he had no intention of marrying Lydia. That was until Mr. Darcy made him an offer he could not refuse. Marriage to Lydia and a commission in the North, or a lengthy stay in prison, owing to his massive debts, which had been assumed by Darcy himself. Mr. George Wickham was a scoundrel and a reprobate, to be sure, but he was no fool. Being married to one of the silliest girls in all of England was to be his fate. News of Elizabeth's own engagement to Mr. Darcy had been delayed until the newlywed Mr. and Mrs. Wickham had come and gone away from Longbourn. Only Jane and Mr. Bennet had been informed. The former was overjoyed, and the latter pleased, but somewhat subdued in his response. I have given Mr. Darcy my consent. He is the kind of man, indeed, to whom I shall never dare refuse anything which he condescended to ask. I now give it to you, as you are resolved on having him. I could not have parted with you, my Lizzie, to anyone less worthy. While Mr. Bingley had indeed left Pemberley with the intention of returning to Hertfordshire to make amends to Jane for his neglect, and hopefully to rekindle the flames that had been left unattended for far too long, business in town called him away far sooner than he would have wished. He had only been in Hertfordshire long enough to have a long overdue family dinner with the Bennets. And while Mrs. Bennet had made her expectation for a marriage proposal perfectly clear, Jane's feelings he had not entirely ascertained. For Jane's part, she was glad for Bingley's absence when the Bennet family received word of Lydia's elopement with Mr. Wickham. She did not trust herself not to send him away and thus spare him such a connection. By the time of Bingley's return, news had arrived from London that Lydia and Wickham were to be married. Bingley needed not to know anything at all about the reason for young Lydia's marriage, other than it was put together rather hastily, owing to the lovers' severe need to be together. Keeping Bingley in the dark about the true nature of the affair had not been entirely Jane's fault. The business of Mrs. Bennet's life being to marry off her 5 daughters, she did not dare chance that Mr. Bingley's inconstancy might once again rear its head, causing him to abscond in the face of such familial frailty. There would be time enough for the truth to unfold after Jane had succeeded in garnering a marriage proposal, was her mother's conviction. Sure enough, as fate would have it, there was to be a wedding at Netherfield Park just 3 months to the day of her dear, dear Mrs. Lydia Wickham's. While Jane's pending marriage was really something, it paled in comparison to Lizzie's conquest, as Mrs. Bennet was wont to boast. How her second eldest daughter had traveled to the north with the Gardiners, and subsequently to London with them to be of service to young Lydia, and still managed to secure the hand of the proud Mr. Darcy, Mrs. Bennet could not fathom. All she needed to know, indeed cared to know, was her daughter had done it, and now she was rich beyond all their wildest dreams. Mrs. Elizabeth Darcy, married by special license, with a house in town, many fine dresses and fine carriages and expensive jewels. What pin money her second eldest daughter had. Of all these things, Mrs. Bennet boasted aloud about to anyone who would listen. She knew her second eldest daughter could not be so clever for nothing. How Eliza Bennet had managed to do in a matter of days, it seemed, that which she had been unable to carry out in years, vexed Miss Bingley exceedingly. However, a complete capitulation of her favorite dream of one day being the next mistress of Pemberley was not in the young lady's nature. Retaining her rights of visitation surely would not be possible unless she got along with Elizabeth, and thus she pretended to put her whole heart into it, thinking it was just the thing to do when Mr. Darcy finally came to his senses and realized the woman whom he really loved had been right there beside him all along. Elizabeth had not spent nearly as much time getting to know Miss Darcy as she would have preferred, owing to her hasty departure from Derbyshire in the wake of the youngest Bennet daughter's scandal. All that was destined to change, for Georgiana had decided to make Pemberley her home. The newlyweds, Mr. and Mrs. Darcy, could not have been more pleased with the arrangement. The former, because he always wanted a loving and caring sister in Georgiana's life, and the latter, because Miss Darcy, despite her brief lapse in judgment regarding George Wickham, was everything a young lady ought to be. What an exceptional example she would set for Elizabeth's 2 younger sisters, as well as a delightful female companion for Elizabeth herself. As for the Gardiners, what did Mr. and Mrs. Darcy not owe them? Had they not brought Elizabeth to Derbyshire, the chance encounter between her and Mr. Darcy at Pemberley certainly would never have occurred. Furthermore, had it not been for Mrs. Gardiner's tacit approval of the match and her subtle approach in helping Elizabeth see what was in her heart from the start, the young lovers would never have reached such a prompt understanding. Mr. Gardiner had also played a part in hastening the understanding between the young lovers, even if unknowingly done. Indeed, both Mr. and Mrs. Darcy were both ever sensible of the warmest gratitude toward Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, who, by bringing Elizabeth into Derbyshire, had been the means of uniting them. Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth were enjoying their first days and nights as man and wife, much too much to be bothered about leaving their apartments. However, some tasks beyond amorous ministrations must be attended, one of them being reading their mounting piles of correspondence. That particular morning, one letter especially captured Mr. Darcy's attention. It was from his aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who had been positively incensed upon learning of her nephew's engagement. She had gone so far as to travel to Hertfordshire to confront Elizabeth, but to no avail. Darcy usually would have shielded his dear wife from such vitriol as her ladyship was wont to spew. But one passage in particular struck him as being ironic. Listen to what my aunt has to say, and tell me that it is not uncanny, my love. He then read enough of what his aunt wrote in her letter to pique his wife's curiosity. Elizabeth placed the letter she was reading aside. Did she really say that? Darcy handed her the missive. Here it is. Read it for yourself. Elizabeth read the part that Darcy pointed out to her, mainly in silence. The next line, read at first in silence, bore repeating out loud. Alas, the shades of Pemberley are thus polluted. Elizabeth immediately recalled the words she had spoken to him that day at the station. She swallowed. I would never have dreamed that your aunt and I could share a similar vein of thought. As Elizabeth preferred to remember the past only as it brought her pleasure, she shrugged. She half smiled. Handing the letter back to her husband, she said, It goes to show how utterly ridiculous my thinking was at the time. Darcy laid the letter aside and drew Elizabeth in his arms. I am eternally grateful you were able to banish such thoughts from your mind and give our love a chance to prevail against all odds. Else, I would never have known such satiating pleasures as this. Are you suggesting, sir, that those liberties we enjoyed the night of our moonlight stroll, when I first traveled to Derbyshire, were insufficient? There are liberties, my love, and then there are liberties. Are all liberties not the same? Mr. Darcy assumed the perfect attitude to assure Elizabeth that he was completely in her power. Can there be any doubt, my love? You have been listening to The Means of Uniting Them, written and read by P.O. Dixon. Copyright 2024.